Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Hitting the Mark with Mike Conley. Today we're going to move on in Mohammed's time, actually from the time of his death, and we're going to take a look at the next 548 battles over a 1400-year period right up until our present time. And I think it's going to be an eye-opener. I hope that you have time to sit down and listen carefully, because after his death, Islam, through Muhammad's followers, swept over the Middle East, North Africa, Spain, Italy, and Eastern Europe. So let's begin. This is gruesome, and I'll be honest with you up front, but I believe that we need to know this because we have not been told. We're going to start in the 7th century. The destruction of the Jazima tribe by a man named Khalid, who was a very devout follower of Muhammad. Khalid was at a place called the Battle of Olayas in Iraq. He took the captain of the Zoroastrian Persian tribe and his wife. He cut off the head of the captain and let his blood run in the sand. And then he raped the captain's wife in that same sand. This was a companion of Muhammad, a follower, and this is the nature of Islamic Jihad. Where did Khalid learn how to do this? From following Muhammad. A man named Umar made a conquest of Jerusalem, and he made Christians and Jews into something called dhimmis, which were in fact third-class slaves. Now, for the next few centuries, we're going to take a look at something called the Islamic Golden Age, and it's very surprising. So listen closely. We're in the 8th century now, Golden Age. There was an attack on the Sindhs. 26,000 Hindus were murdered. Armenian nobles were burned, and in Ephesus, 7,000 Greeks were enslaved. 9th century, still Golden Age. All new churches were destroyed. In Amorium, a massive enslavement of all Christians, and the churches were burned. Egyptian Christians revolted over something called the Jihad, which was a slave tax. 10th century, still Golden Age. Thessalonica, 22,000 enslaved. In Seville, Christians were massacred. 30,000 churches were destroyed in Egypt and Syria. 11th century, still Golden Age. 6,000 Jews of Morocco were killed. Hundreds of Jews in Cordoba were murdered. 13th century, Golden Age. In India, 50,000 Hindu slaves were freed by conversion. They either converted to Islam or they would have been killed. A 20-year campaign created 400,000 new Muslims out of what had been Hindus. In Damascus and Safed, Christians were mass murdered. The Jews of Marrakesh massacred. 4,000 Jews of Grenada were killed. In Georgia and Armenia, there was an invasion. In the Hindustan, 15,000 were killed and 500,000 were enslaved. We are now in the 12th century. Still the Golden Age. In Yemen, Jews were told you either convert or you will die. The Christians of Grenada were deported to Morocco. In India, many cities were destroyed. They were told you either convert or die, and in one town, 20,000 were enslaved. We're now in the 14th century, still the Golden Age. In Cairo, riots and churches were burned. The Jews of Tabriz were forced to convert. And now we come to a gentleman named Tamerlane, one of the wickedest men on the face of the earth. In India, he massacres 90,000 in one day. In India, 30,000 massacres in cold blood. And in Tughlaq, 180,000 people were turned into slavery. Now, this is the 15th century, and we're out of the Golden Age, but you'll notice there's no difference. Tamerlane in India devastates 700 villages. He then turns to Iraq, and he annihilates the Nestorian and Jacobite Christians. Afghanistan was partly Christian. When he got done, they were all gone. After 700 years of attacks, Islam finally captured and destroyed Constantinople. 16th century. The son of Tamerlane destroyed temples and continued to force conversions. The generals that were under him were ordered to build 2 towers of human heads after the victories. And the women of nobility committed mass suicide because they did not want to be forced into slavery or used as sex slaves. 17th century. The Jews of Yemen and Persia forced to convert. Forced conversions of Greek Christians to Islam. The Persian Zoroastrian persecution was increasing, and in India, 600,000 Hindus were killed by Akbar. The term Allah Akbar is where that came from, commemorating that man. 18th century, Zoroastrian persecution continues. Jews are expelled from Jeddah. The Jews of Morocco are massacred, and the Hindu persecution continues. 19th century, forced conversion of Jews in Iran. The Jews of Baghdad were massacred. 250,000 Armenians slaughtered in Turkey. Zoroastrians are annihilated in Iran. The 20th century, over 1 million Turkish Armenians are killed in an Islamic jihad. So you know the number of battles, and you can see how this is going. We're taught in our schools by the established story of the classical destruction had nothing to do with Islam. The great classical part of Europe, Islam had nothing to do with its destruction, yet it was the Islamic hordes in Jihad that burned the university at Alexandria and the library. It was a force going through Europe and destroyed everything in its path. The Golden Age was destroyed by Islam. So I know that could not have been very pleasant. But we need to understand, especially with just a few days ago, we had an incident out in San Bernardino, California, where many were killed. We don't know enough about Islam currently because we don't know much about its history, and you need to know this. We cannot any longer afford to live our lives and get blindsided. Islam is serious about world domination. I want to read you a quote from Muammar Gaddafi. You see, we're getting this on two fronts. Number one is Islamic Jihad. But this is the other way that we're being harmed. Listen to what Muammar Gaddafi said. We don't need terrorists, and we don't need suicide bombers. The 50 million Muslims in Europe will turn it into a Muslim continent in just a few decades. These are some very tenuous times. You must live alertly. And again, I would emphasize to you, I am not a hate monger. I do not hate Muslims, but I do love the truth. Not long ago in Dearborn, we had an incident down there, and right on TV, there was a, quote, peaceful Muslim carrying a sign that said, "We will use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution." That went on in our own nation, in my state of Michigan. I'm sharing these things with you because they are true. And I hope that if there are any Muslims listening to this, or Christians, or anyone, you need to check these things out, and you need to know the truth, because the truth will set you free. This has been Hitting the Mark with Mike Conley. I am so glad that you have tuned in to listen to this, and I hope that you take this as seriously as it is. So I would leave you in prayerful thoughts. I hope you have a blessed life, and the truth will set you free. Amen.